name is Sophia. My pronouns are she and they, joined by my colleague Mauricio, and we are located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people in Ottawa. So we'll jump right into it, but I just also want to thank Latoya for setting the context, and in particular setting the context for the complexities for LGBTQI refugees once they have fled their country of origin. That's really our real takeaway here, and real hope is to inspire people to get involved in SOGS refugee sponsorship. And I guess maybe just a note on terminology. You'll hear people use LGBTQI plus, LGBT. It's different than what is used often in the Canadian context. And that's kind of what's used globally. And you'll also hear SOGS, which is sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, sex characteristics. Another way of describing the community that we work with. Mauricio.
Good morning, everyone. As Carol and Sophia mentioned, we are working with Capital Refuge. We help LGBTQI plus refugees and newcomers to arrive and travel in Ottawa and Eastern Ontario. We are a member of the National Border from Border to Belongings Coalition. We started in 2010, and it was just a group of people thinking how to support LGBT people living abroad and giving them a second opportunity to come to Canada and find a new life. So, and now 14 years later, we are so happy to announce that we are like an umbrella sponsoring 14 groups co-sponsor LGBTQI plus refugees and newcomers here in Canada. We have two main cores. The first one is sponsoring LGBTQI plus refugees to come to Canada, and the second one is community support and for LGBTQI plus newcomers, because like like not every newcomer that comes to Canada have like a private sponsorship group. We have probably, I don't know, like more than 250 clients that came to Canada under another visa, like a visitor visa or business visa, and then when they're inside the country, they just change their status and claim protection. So how we support them building community? We organize workshops. We organize uh, bowling days, cinema days, let's go to the museum. And like what is good with this is that they can networking to each other, they can exchange numbers, they can support to each other. And like we have cases that we support somebody that has been in the country for like 3 6 months. So they already have like OW, they already have their narrative, they already have their resume on the Canadian standards. But the new person that has been in the country for like 1 or 2 weeks, we don't need to support this person as much if we introduce this new person with another newcomer. So we are just like building this community and they are supporting each other. And this is part of our work in Ottawa. Um, the need is great, and we daily request get requests for people to get a sponsor. From last year, we have like more than 300 people asking to get a sponsor, and this is people that is in a waiting list now, waiting for people like you that can just like work and just like sponsor these newcomers that are having like problems or like difficulties, that are being persecuted or criminalized in their countries of origin. Um, when you guys have experience with the private sponsorship groups, but I just want to mention that this is not a big effort for us. It's just like a meeting a month or something like that. But when we create these groups, these private sponsorship groups, we give a person a new chance in life. Um, That's it. Now my colleague Sophia is going to speak about sponsoring LGBTQI plus refugees.
Yeah, so we kind of, as Mauricio said, this we started out as a real kind of grassroots, like what could we do? We've gained so much political, legal ground in Canada. There are still lots of issues, and we know there are issues that are rising, but what can we do? And we can harness the amazing private refugee sponsorship program, and we can uniquely harness that. The founders of Capital Rainbow Refuge were the first group to successfully sponsor a known LGBTQI case in Canada. And as Mauricio said, we're now an umbrella group. So similar to this network, we are not the ones doing sponsorship, but what we do is we support groups to form sponsorships. We help them with every aspect of that, make it as easy and as smooth as possible. And our mission there is, as Mauricio said, to really help more of the people who are so in need of resettlement to a pathway. We are a constituent group. We work with a SAW, so that's our model. And we have a lot of really diverse groups. And I think sometimes people think, oh, yeah, maybe LGBTQI sponsorship, but I'm not part of that community, so I'm not sure I should do it. You should. And we love having groups full of allies, and there are lots of ways that organizations like Capital Rainbow Refuge, there are many organizations like us across the country, can help kind of round out your group and provide education in areas that you might not know about. Maybe, you've never had a friend who's trans. That's okay. That doesn't mean that you can't sponsor somebody and do a really great job of it. We provide a fair amount of support with regards to training workshops. We have a 4-part training workshop that really goes into providing trauma-informed support and settlement support for LGBTQI newcomers. We support the application process. Often LGBTQI folks are not necessarily registered with UNHCR because of some of the reasons that Latoya mentioned. It's not always safe. The neighboring countries are often more dangerous. The contexts are very complicated. And so we have the ability to name people and to do a full application process in a country of asylum. We provide access to some federal cost share funds, which I think I'm going to speak to a little bit because I think this group might be interested in this. We provide ongoing mentorship and capacity support pre-arrival as well as after newcomers arrive, supporting groups and helping them network and link up with one another. And we also help with fundraising. Can you go to the next slide, please, Mauricio? So I want to pause just very briefly. I know we weren't really asked to speak too much to the Rainbow Wrap, but it is a really amazing and unique funding. It's basically the regular wrap rate for 3 months plus some startup. It ends up being a little bit more than what a BVOR funded sponsorship would be. These are unique spaces. There was a pilot program in 2011. It's been reinstituted. It's a great program. What I really want to pause on here is there's a number of spots we haven't necessarily reached those caps every year, and there are no caps for SAWs. And this is really, really important for you to understand. I know so many people are like, well, we want to do the sponsorship, but reached out to the SAW can't take anymore. We're on a wait list for next year. This is outside of that. It does not count in those quotas. And I think it's really important for you to know. So if your group is excited and interested in LGBTQI sponsorship, this can be an additional project that doesn't come into those quotas. And I really want to kind of flag that, and we can talk about it more later. And at the end, we'll share the contact for the best person that's part of the coalition that manages the wrap requests. So our approach, we take an empowerment and rights-based approach, and we encourage those who are engaged in LGBTQI sponsorship or any sponsorship to take such an approach. Want to really highlight that LGBTQI newcomers are incredibly resilient, to have gone through a journey and stayed alive in the face of so much violence, persecution at every level, as Latoya said, in the family, in the community, from the state, at every level. I really can't underscore that enough. And all forms of violence and persecution are abhorrent And the layers here are really, really quite significant for many in this community. So we want to foster agency. People have the right to make their own choices, and that sometimes can fly in the face of sponsorship, where we want to make choices for people. We really empower people to have the opportunity to build their own life and make their own choices. Similarly, self-determination to decide, you know, who you are and what you want to do, and to have, and that's okay if it looks different. You know, the process of having to describe yourself and be kind of re-traumatized and have to be outed throughout the refugee journey. When people arrive here, we want to ensure that people can tell their own stories in the way that makes sense to them, with the people that feel safe to them. And similarly, privacy, and that comes back to, you know, sharing information and withholding information as you see fit. And I know we have a very specific narrative about queerness in North America, and it's a coming out journey. You're out, and then your life transforms, and you're out with everybody, and, you know, you're out of the closet, like that whole thing. This is not most people's journey, and in particular, people who have grown up in a context and a culture of shame and self-hatred, and where your community is often against you. It's a very different journey, and it probably isn't linear, and that's okay. And we have sponsored people that are never going to be out loud and proud, and that's okay. They're safe and they're here. I'm going to pass it back to Mauricio here to talk a
Yeah.
little bit about some challenges.
Speaking about the unique settlement challenges that we have, or that through our work we are being identified with LGBTQI plus refugees, is communication before, during, and after the process. 2 days ago, I was speaking with my team, and I asked them, like, if I'm speaking about the communication that we have to establish with our with the people we are sponsoring, we have to start building trust between us, because they are being persecute and criminalize, and even though if we offer them support, they're not sure about it, so they're not gonna be open with all the information. They're gonna be just like pretty quiet and reserved with the information that we are looking for from them. So that's why we think that it's important to establish communication, like sometimes like every day with the people at the beginning the process, and like during and after. Managing the expectations, um I also asked my team, and like, how can we manage the expectations? We have those particular cases that people were like lawyers or doctors, bro, and then they came to Canada, and they want to start working as lawyers or doctors, but like they can't, they cannot, because like kind of like they don't recognize their studies abroad in like those specific careers. So but like this is not different than like a regular refugee and LGBTQI plus refugee. What we identified with LGBTQI plus refugees is the sexual health. They have like minimal knowledge about sexual health. They are being told that having sex with a person that they are in love with is sin and is not legal. So when they came to Canada, it's super easy, just like download an app, start hooking up with people, and just like fun. So in their minds, it's just like partying all the time, cry all the time, and unhealthy self sex all the time as well. So in our work building community, we are focused a lot in sexual health. We want them to know that they are like free to do everything you want and express themselves in the way they prefer, but always being careful with their sexual health. As I mentioned before, the trust and safety. Um, Accurate risk to safety, and many develop distrust of authorities. So not knowing which support workers or doctors make accuse them. We had a experience with somebody that came to Canada. He was a friend, a country in Africa, uh, very proudly gay person. And when finally we got a family doctor for this client, the family doctor was from his same country. And this consultation was awful. Like this doctor should be professional and should be like providing an equal service for like everyone, but it wasn't like that. So like those kind of experience, we want to accompany our LGBTQI plus newcomers, because they need a little bit more support in the process when they start their new journey here in Canada. As Sophia mentioned before, let people tell their own stories. Sometimes for them is not easy to say that they're gay. Like when you ask them like, how do you identify yourself? And they mention things like, oh yeah, people say that I was having sex with another man. People say, or like when they pronounce the word gay, they just look down because they feel ashamed of this. And it's normal. It's part of their journey, and we have to be like so patient with them. Patient, build trust, because in their situation, lying has been like an strategy of survival. So sometimes we are gonna find inconsistencies in their um I forgot the word. um
In their narrative, like it
Yeah,
just,
in their narrative.
yeah,
Thank you,
yeah.
Sophia. That's why you're here. Thank you. Yeah, so sometimes we are gonna find inconsistencies on their narrative, but it doesn't mean that like the persecution or the criminalized in their countries is not real. So we have to be patient with them and manage all this narrative in the way they feel comfortable with. Um, Diaspora community challenge and lack of a safe community. We have another case with a client from another country in Africa. When he came to Ottawa, we like the only thing we can offer to him was like go to a shelter. I was surprised that all the people in his shelter was from his own town and in Africa. So he was okay. He was quiet about his situation, but like people around him was like, okay, so he's from my own town. He's a refugee in Canada, and he's a single man in their 40s. What that means? He's gay. Easy. So they start like passing on the information and people like on their own town, and his family was like harassing like in their country. So we have to be so careful. And sometimes for us, like in our idea, we can think like, okay, maybe because this person is like from South America, they speak Spanish, they will feel comfortable meeting another Spanish speakers. Not always. ID identity challenges. Many people have like, especially trans people, came here to Canada and they have to stay 1 year after they can change their name and gender in their legal identification. So please always identify yourself with your pronouns. My name is Mauricio. My pronouns are he, him. Ask the pronouns are like their pronouns. Nothing wrong to ask people's pronouns, and call them for the name that they prefer. Significant trauma and mental health challenge and lack of what is it? Um yeah, that like those refugees and newcomers experience significant trauma and mental health challenges. Um so we have to work around like a lot around of like sexual orientation and gender identification, because like sometimes they're gonna be shame or like um uh they're gonna be shy to speak about like their trauma. But when we ask like their story and their conditions, we are supporting them to release the pain, to practice for their hearings, and just like making them feel like comfortable and comfortable with their own self. Always like not making pressure on them, but just like respecting their own speed to process the information of their new life. Sophia?
I'm going to be timekeeper here. We're very
We're at the
close
end.
to time. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we're at the end. So,
Yeah.
you know, you've heard here, like the need is extremely great. There are so many countries that criminalize queer and trans people, and even where it's not criminalized, there's so much hostility and it's very dangerous for people. People are fleeing often to very dangerous contexts. If it wasn't clear enough, sponsorship is a lifeline. There are so many countries of asylum for LGBTQI people where that's probably the only reasonable, like it's the only way out. You are really well suited to help, even if you're not queer. You are engaged in sponsorship. You are like kind and generous, and that's what it takes to do this work well. And the settlement journeys are successful with sponsorship groups. As Mauricio said, we work with 250 clients, and most of them are not privately sponsored, but those who are thriving. They have a whole network around them. They have been connected to community. They have had doors opened for them, access to housing, right? We know that the power of sponsorship, and in particular for LGBTQI people, when you build those trusting relationships, this is foundational to people's journey of being restored as a whole person. Building new relationships with people of trust where you've never had that before is an incredibly powerful journey. It's so important for people's future. And with your help, we can do more. Reminder, there are no caps here on the RAP sponsorships, and we would really be delighted to chat more about how we can continue to do more of the sponsorship work. And leaving everybody with a couple contact pieces there. And sorry if we went a couple minutes over time. Thank you for your patience.
And I'm starting this presentation with a video of refugees who are sharing their own journeys so that you can hear in their own voices what it's like to live in a country that criminalizes people because of their LGBTQI+ identity, and how this criminalization and persecution forces them to flee.
In Jamaica, being gay, it is terrible there, knowing if somebody knows your sexuality, that you're gay, they will train you. In Jamaica, being gay, it is terrible there, knowing if somebody knows your sexuality, that you're gay, they will train you, they will kill you, they will call your names, and they will point you out to other people who may not know their sexuality. So you have to be living under the table, as they would say.
I couldn't face the humiliation and persecutions from the community and my family.
I've been stabbed, I've been raped, my house has been put to fire. I've lost my business because I'm trans. I live there not so well because people who live there are very close-minded. Why is it important to still here right now? Well, I'm a bit worried about my family back at home because, if people know that I'm gay, they would actually target my family. I realized I was gay when I was going into high school.
Dominican parents are very much not in favor of their son being gay. And I think that could be one of the worst things the family would ever want to know. Because my dad was like, if you don't accept this, I'm going to report you to the police. And you know what it is back home? If you've been reported as a gay man in the police or caught in the act, 14 years in the jail.
They arrested me, they took me to their office, they stripped me naked,
assaulted me, and even outed me to my neighbors. When my family found out, I tried coming suicide. See how the mark, because I thought I was different, and I was going through like a depression stage then because I was looking for acceptability.
I did tell my mom. I sat her down and I spoke to her about it, and she wept bitterly. Her concern wasn't about me telling her the truth. Her concern is about having witnessed a lot of gay men being killed.
As a trans woman or anyone from the LGBT community, it's either you die at some point very early or you try to fight your way out. I seek asylum because I want to be a better person and live my life as comfortable as I wanted to be. That the way I couldn't be living in Jamaica.
But I've seen other people who go through asylum, and a lot of them are being maybe SROs. They're, some of them don't have money, they don't have food, and I just consider myself lucky because I have very good friends.
A lot of my friends from different countries tell me, you must write your own story.
I could just want to feel gay today, and nobody's gonna say, why are you working, or why are you sashaying, or why are you wearing this, or why are you wearing that?
My son is a very understanding young man. I did tell him at the age of 15, so he was like, oh, I thought it was something terrible you're gonna tell me. I said, this is not terrible to you? He said, nope, because I have gay teachers and they are some of the most warm people I've ever come across.
As soon as I met the first trans person, she kind of helped me to realize who I was and helped me in my transition initially.
I would say to a young gay person in Belize, find a way to get to another country that offers asylum for the LGBT people.
Take care of yourself and know that there is another place you can go to. If it's just me starting all over, I'm ready. It's going to be hard, which I'm experiencing right now, but I don't mind. That's because I'm not living a life.
So for the next couple of minutes, I'll be switching between these two slides. The first one is a map that ILGA World publishes annually. And what ILGA does is that they track the status of LGBTQI plus criminalization in countries around the world. And the next slide will look at the Williams Institute's map of the acceptance of LGBTQI plus people in countries across the world. What this map shows, and you can see, the regions and the countries that are shaded white, there's no criminalization in those countries, and the deeper orange shaded colors, demonstrate the extreme or the most extreme forms of punishment for LGBTQI plus people across the globe, and that would be the death penalty. So many of the ways that states punish LGBTQI plus people for being LGBTQI plus, ranges sometimes from anywhere from, 2 years imprisonment up to 8 years, 10 years. In some jurisdictions, death is possible, and in other jurisdictions, maybe about 10 or 11 jurisdictions, people can be punished by death. And what you will see as I go to the next slide is that there is a correlation between the countries that criminalize people and the countries where there is very low, if not, zero acceptance of LGBTQI plus individuals. So this is the other map I was referring to. This is produced by the Williams Institute. And from the previous map, you'll see that the countries that were shaded, or the regions that were shaded white on this map, you can see that those are the countries where there tends to be more acceptance. On the previous map, you saw the countries or the regions where LGBTQI plus people are criminalized, and that corresponds here with the very low levels of acceptance of LGBTQI plus people. Why do people flee? Now, the data that we have at Rainbow Railroad, as well as data from the Williams Institute, demonstrate that LGBTQI plus people are forced to flee home for several reasons. And, you know, I have some of them on screen. What I will say is that family rejection, certainly in many of the cases that we have handled at Rainbow Railroad, tends to be the #1 reason that people find themselves needing to flee home. Because family rejection is not simply about your family not accepting your LGBTQI plus identity. It's also connected with the homelessness that people will experience, the physical violence, the blackmail, and sometimes the sexual violence that LGBTQI plus people will experience. And so for a number of reasons, people are persecuted. They are persecuted by their family, they are persecuted by their communities, they are persecuted by their state. And this kind of persecution and violence happens in the home, in the wider community, and oftentimes by the state. In Uganda last year, for example, when the anti-homosexuality bill was passed into law, there was a significant amount of crackdown by the state, and this is usually where you find a lot of the unlawful detention and arrests taking place. A lot of police brutality is usually associated with these kinds of cases. It also uniquely affects human rights defenders who are doing work within these countries to protect or to attempt to protect and preserve the rights of LGBTQI plus people. So these are the reasons why LGBTQI plus people find themselves in a position where they have to flee home. That's just the first part of the journey for many LGBTQI plus refugees. When folks flee home, it doesn't automatically guarantee that they will begin to have or it doesn't guarantee that they'll be able to live a life free from discrimination and violence. Because the way that the refugee claim system has been structured often means that people have to flee to what's called a transit country before they are able to access resettlement pathways. And one of the things that happens to LGBTQI folks who, you know, have to live in refugee camps, for example, is that they experience violence and persecution from other refugees. They also experience violence and persecution from the state that they had to flee to while they wait for their refugee claims to be processed. This is a quote from an LGBTQI plus refugee from Turkey who was describing how unsafe they felt in the refugee camp when they went to Turkey to make an asylum claim. The next couple of slides will look at why there is such limited access to resettlement pathways, specifically for LGBTQI plus refugees. Now, there are millions of people across the globe who are displaced. The last report that the UNHCR published told us that over 110 million people globally are displaced because of war, humanitarian crises, climate disasters, and persecution based on different factors. One of those factors is people's LGBTQI plus identity. While there is no clear data on the number of LGBTQI plus people who have been displaced because of persecution. What we know from estimates is that as many as 5 million, if not more, people across the globe have been displaced because of their LGBTQI plus identity. That data is not it's not as we are not 100% sure that the number is actually 5 million. It's really just an estimate based on the percentage of refugees who have identified that they are LGBTQI+, but recognizing that there are many people who flee because of their LGBTQI+ identity, even though they may be afraid to openly make that claim when they are making refugee claims. So the first barrier that a lot of folks face when they try to flee is visa restrictions. From the map that we looked at earlier, we saw that the countries where there is global acceptance, those countries tend to impose visa restrictions on travel. And many of the countries where the nationals are required to have visas also correlate with the countries that criminalize people because of their LGBTQI+ identity. So getting out is difficult. Actually, fleeing home is very difficult for many people. And so what happens is that LGBTQI+ refugees tend to take on, a very treacherous path of trying to escape the persecution that they experience in their home country. But it is difficult to flee in the first place. For the few who actually get to flee, it's also difficult for them to access the refugee claim process because they have to, quote unquote, prove past persecution or prove that they have a credible fear of future persecution. That's unique for LGBTQI+ refugees because unlike in cases where there's a climate disaster, for example, or where there is war, the persecution that LGBTQI+ people experience is deeply personal. And what the system requires, what the refugee claim process requires is that because people have to prove that they have been persecuted because of their sexual orientation, because of their gender identity, it may mean that one, they have to out themselves, which can be dangerous. It can also mean re-traumatizing individuals because they have to go in very they have to explain in great detail the traumatic experiences, the violent experiences that they would have had because of their LGBTQI+ identity. In many instances, they're required to provide evidence. These would include screenshots of personal, intimate messages they may have had with a same-sex partner. Sometimes they're required to provide what's called letters of support from organizations or from individuals who are acutely aware of their LGBTQI+ identity. And this is usually very difficult for LGBTQI+ people to prove because they're trying to hide this identity, but at the same time, they are required to prove that it is their identity that's causing them to want to flee. And so it creates a lot of challenges for individuals to access this process in the first place. And then when they do get to access the process, they have to go to these usually dangerous or equally dangerous transit countries to wait to be processed by humanitarian protection agencies or governments. And so accessing that, becomes very difficult. There's also a lot of discrimination and violence that they experience while they wait. And they experience this from many refugees who may be fleeing war or climate disasters who believe that LGBTQ people don't have a right to make an asylum claim because of the personal persecution they would have experienced due to their identity. And so what can you do? Continuously educate yourself about the realities of LGBTQI refugees, talk about this issue with people in your network and with your community leaders, fundraise or donate to organizations and sponsors who are helping an LGBTQI plus refugee settle in Canada. And most of all, be open and willing to sponsoring an LGBTQI refugee. And I'll end on this note that the more sponsors we have who are willing to provide support to LGBTQI plus refugees, and the more we'll be able to resettle these individuals. And I think I'm at time, so thank you.
And I'd like to say thanks to LaToya, Sophia, and Mauricio. I really appreciate your insights and your comments. I have great respect for both of these organizations. I think they do great work and are real supports to our broader community around the world. I would also say, and I think this was brought out by Sophia's comments, that not everyone who identifies as an ally is queer. They don't have to be queer people to be an ally in support of our community. And if it wasn't clear from my bio, I identify as queer. I'm a gay man. I have a partner. And I think a lot of the work that I've been involved with, if I didn't have a partner, I don't know how we would do it. How I would do it personally. I need that support myself to be able to help support other people. I've been asked to speak about different resources that are available. My experience is primarily in Toronto. I do know of and am aware of some resources that are available outside of that, but my personal experience is basically in Toronto. I don't think there's a comprehensive list of organizations that exists across the province that support and help queer communities. That's queer people who are here, but also queer people who come here. But I do think that a little bit of research and investigation can help you find things that may be closer to home. Smaller communities are probably more of a challenge, but I would say don't bet on the fact that there isn't something there. Do a Google search or something or other. You'll find we're everywhere. And even small communities sometimes have, for one example that came to mind to me was, I believe Haliburton, the small community of Haliburton has a pride celebration in the summer, like a lot of different communities. It's fairly small. And I found out about it through people who I know in Toronto who go to summer camp for queers and happened to know that there was a celebration for Pride there. So I won't go through this much because I think this was also raised by Sophia. You see lots of different acronyms put forward about describing our community. In fact, we're not a single community. We are a collection or a group of communities. All of these are correct. It depends on who you are, what your perspective is, and so on and so forth. The one I was going to point out specifically, I think Sophia had actually already mentioned, was Sogiesk. It's one that collectively sort of characterizes the different characteristics of people who are marginalized for the reasons that have been so clearly outlined in some of the previous talks. I want to preface this as well. We talk about safe space as a place where people can feel free to be who they are, to express themselves as who they are, to behave in ways that they feel are normal for themselves, and so on. It's a bit of a goal to reach. Oftentimes, we also refer to safer spaces because, especially when you're in connection with different organizations and professionals that operate as supporting to our community, they are not 100% safe. And I think we've heard about that already, that you can get practitioners and organizations that show you that sticker in the window of their, like the front window of their organization that says we're a safe space. It's not always true. But I think our challenge, or the challenge more broadly, is that we try and present as safe a space as possible. It's continuously improving the way we approach this. It's about looking at the staff that we have, the kinds of services, the way that we present and offer those services to people. It's a constant update and challenge to get that to move toward the safe space, which is the ideal, the goal, And it's not necessarily the case that everywhere will be that way all the time. So why do we need them? I think we've heard this from a number of different comments that were made before. I'm talking about people who come here as LGBTQI plus individuals who have escaped from places where there is extreme persecution and so on. We need these in order to be able to validate and provide that kind of assurance that people, when they get here, will have the kinds of representation, the kinds of supports that they deserve and that they have not had. And it will take a lot for people to get over the hurdles that they've had basically a lifelong experiencing. And as I said before, just because you see some of these stickers, you know, the progress flag, the trans flag, and so on, presented, you know, on behind the front desk or on the front window saying it's a safe space, it isn't always the case. So you do have to do a little bit of investigation and support with people who are coming here in order to make sure that they are in fact safe for people to be able to receive the kinds of supports that they need. I think in terms of the supports, there are multiple different layers, and I'm going to get into those in some of the subsequent slides here. But to start this, and I mean, this has already been mentioned as well, it's finding community. And I think one of the things that has been like very much absent for people who have arrived here as sponsored refugees, as GARs, as people who have claimed asylum is they either had no community or the community was very much underground. It was something where it had to be quite hidden. What we enjoy in North America, in Western Europe, you know, more of the English-speaking countries and you know, European countries as well, is openness and community. And there are community organizations that have been established in Canada, the United States. Those would probably go back to the 60s and 70s. Not without a lot of challenge and a lot of difficulties getting them set up and organized. And now there are a multitude of different organizations in operation, you know, covering everything from health to social services to sports to camping to you name it. They are in your communities. Larger ones probably more so than others. For example, in Toronto, there's something called the 519 Community Center. It's on Church Street. It's in the heart of the queer community here. It's a great place to start. They have a multitude of different programs and services that they offer. They will also direct you to other places if they don't themselves particularly offer the kinds of things you're looking for. For example, Among Friends is a 519's weekly 2S LGBTQ. 2S, by the way, is Two-Spirit, and that's an expression that's not really applicable to people who come to Canada. I mean, it's something that isn't even ubiquitous across all Indigenous groups in North America, but this particular program is also geared to Two-Spirit people at the 519. I looked up a couple of things because I wasn't aware what sort of, and I mean, I'm sure Sophia and Mauricio can provide more information detailed. Kind Space is a community center in Ottawa. London has an LGBTQ plus community center. I'm sure Windsor does. I would imagine Kingston does. There are different types of organizations. Not all of them may be community center. The 519 is actually supported by the City of Toronto, which is great because then it is ensured a certain amount of funding and continuity and so on. Some places appear and disappear over time simply because they don't have the resources. In terms of health services, what's different about us? We have probably hidden most of or all of very critical health concerns that relate specifically to the LGBTQ communities. Because in countries where we come from or the ones we have sought asylum in, that's not recognized, it's not supported. You can be criminalized, demonized, and various other kinds of assaults and aggression taken against you for that. So you tend to not bring those forward. Sometimes there isn't even language that exists in someone's mother tongue about how you would explain what is the problem that I'm having. And one area in particular may be for people who are trans. It's for some people, it just doesn't exist. Like they don't know what that is. They don't understand. There are people who have arrived here who don't know how to characterize what they're feeling. I distinctly remember one person saying, I don't know what, when people were going around a circle giving pronouns, they felt very uncomfortable because they did not know what pronoun they should use for themselves. So there's all kinds of things related to that sort of thing that affect your need for health services and what you may be experiencing in terms of health challenges because of all of the stigma and so on that have been attached to that. And mental health issues are another thing. It's a whole other ball of wax. I mean, that's true for everyone who arrives. I would say there's trauma based in anyone who's been refugeed, but there are also the extra layers of mental health issues that people present with when they arrive here that go beyond just the standard. And I mean, the standard ones are horrific enough themselves and so on. So how do you find these? Well, this is the $1 million question, really. There is an organization out of Toronto called Rainbow Health Ontario. They are in connection with Sherburne Health. They provide a directory of health services pretty much across Ontario. It's hard to maintain, I think. I mean, I haven't looked at their, what their current offering is, but it's hard to maintain who it is that's actually offering health services that are safe and receptive to people who are LGBTQI+. But they are a pretty good place to start, I think. There's an organization in Toronto. I found my family doctor here about 30 years ago through the Hassle-Free Clinic. I knew of it because of the HIV crisis. And I said, I'm a gay man. I want to have a gay doctor. And they were able at the time, this was fortunate. It was 30 years ago. It wasn't really a problem. But this particular clinic basically asks no questions. I think it doesn't even require you to show OHIP. I'm not 100% sure of that, but you can go there and get sexual health support for medical conditions that relate pretty much exclusively to, or mostly exclusively to LGBTQI people. Access Alliance is another organization in Toronto that's closely connected to one of the settlement agencies here. They provide you referral and access to various different sorts of things. I mean, they're sort of an ancillary organization that isn't directly involved in that, but I think they are relatively okay when it comes to, but again, it really comes down to individuals who are involved in providing the services to the communities. I will say, several times with people that we have helped here, they've sought to find a doctor who speaks the language that they spoke from birth. So the one that they were most comfortable and understood, that doctor also came from a part of the world where they were criminalized, they were ostracized, they were abused, and so on. And their experience of working with those doctors, even though they could talk to them in the language that they felt most comfortable in, they were given very negative signs. So this is a difficulty that is hard to overcome. It makes it at a time when we have almost no doctors available, and yet you're looking for a very specific type of doctor that will be sympathetic to people who are LGBTQI+, makes it even harder. There are some places that are available. I mean, there are a couple of very specific physician practices in Toronto. Sorry, I just skipped ahead a little bit myself on this, but there's some that are working with trans people. They have developed their own expertise in providing trans care, but those resources are really quite burdened by the numbers of people that they have needing and wanting the kinds of services they have. Crisis support, what I was going to say here is there's an LGBTQ youth line that I believe exists across the province. Because of the pressures that people who come to Canada arrive with, they're often, they're just overburdened with this sort of thing. And that's particularly true of younger people. It's not exclusively for, but it's particularly younger people who are struggling to find themselves and find a place where they can actually be who they are. So Youthline is one of those resources that's available to them. I'll leave that go at that one. I'm trying to make sure I get done by the time I'm supposed to get finished. And Carol, you can let me know when that is.
You're doing very well. Thank you, Bill. Thank you.
Okay. Queer settlement organizations. There are a few. I don't think there are a lot. Settlement organizations are ones that are provided funds by IRCC, specifically to provide those types of services to people who are arriving here either as GARs or as privately sponsored, and also to some extent, I think, for people who claim asylum, although there's a bit of a gray area there. But let's say for GARs and sponsored individuals, settlement agencies have been set up by IRCC to do that. I would say they can be very tricky. I have had some experience with two in the GTA who I would say, here's an example of where you put a sticker in the window that says you're a safe space, but you're not. In one case in particular, there was one self-identified LGBTQ person working at that organization who said, we are not a safe space. And I would say that's true in that they have a landing pad shelter, sort of a newcomer arrival center, where they put LGBTQ people into the same place as people who are also from the same area that they came from, who started to attack them verbally and sometimes physically. This is something that should have been made aware of to the people who run the settlement agency. For some reason didn't. Like, I don't know what the information is sometimes that gets passed between IRCC and the settlement agencies, or what sponsorship teams. Generally, I've heard of this problem more from those who are GARs than I have from people who have worked with settlement agency, or sorry, sponsorship teams with this. But it's important to know that the settlement organization that you're working with is actually really supportive of, and I'll point to ASAP here. It's the Alliance for South Asian AIDS Prevention. It started out as an AIDS organization, as the name implies, to help people from South Asian countries be able to provide, get and seek access to and get the supports that they need for HIV and AIDS. They have since become a settlement agency and organization. They also provide services in a number of different languages. Their reach now is beyond South Asia to, I think, sort of the Middle East and somewhat into Africa, as I understand it. There are a list of, I pulled this list of languages off their website, but I think they may also offer in maybe one or two other African languages. I'm not exactly sure about that. They're a good organization. Actually, I know somebody who works for them. I really respect them. I think they do a great job. I'm going to do another plug for Capital Rainbow Refuge. I am so impressed by what they do, their origins, and how they've evolved. I know people who are actually involved in sponsor groups that work with Capital Rainbow Refuge. They've done a great job. It's a shout out to them. I think they're wonderful. I unfortunately don't know more of organizations or agencies that operate, say, in London, in Hamilton, and so on. But I'm sure there are other agencies and organizations that may be very supportive of the queer community. Housing support. I'm going to get to a little more comment on finding housing, but well, actually, maybe I'll do it here. This is the elephant in the room. I mean, it's what everybody is faced with. There is, huge shortage of housing across the country. Most urban centers, and even now into smaller communities, there just is a lack of, and it's so expensive that people can't afford it. There are some ways you can try and refine your focus in order to find spaces for people. Homes and Roomies for Queers in Toronto, London, Ottawa, and Hamilton. These are Facebook groups that are available that allow you to be able to find people who are looking for queer people share their space or have space for queer people and so on. It is a great thing, I think, that December of a year ago in 2022, the City of Toronto, in conjunction with the 519, opened what I believe is the first dedicated queer shelter in the City of Toronto. It's relatively small. It's just getting started. I mean, it's been just over a year or so that it's been in operation, but it recognizes and understands that there is specific need for queer people to have a space that they can find some measure of safety and comfort. Safety is a word I think that's been used a couple of times this morning. Trust is another one, and those are two words keep in the back of your mind, because I think they are very, very important for this group. There is also another youth shelter, Friends of Ruby. There are a couple of others that operate in and around the City of Toronto. Their focus is mostly on, but not necessarily exclusively on, queer youth. But oftentimes when youth end up in shelters, it's probably because they're queer and they had some negative experiences in their homes, their communities, left there, came to the city or were in the city and so on, and had to find some place that was safe for them. This is the other elephant in the room. So right now we've got a really packed room with two elephants. One is finding a place for people to live, and the other one's finding a doctor, a primary care provider. Again, this is a nationwide issue, a problem. There are limited resources. I work in the healthcare sector. This is, a conversation that happens every day about how do we expand. I'm actually working on a project in the Ottawa area right now about trying to provide access to primary care medical services to newcomers in the Ottawa area. And it's just like, it's deja vu listening to the conversations that were happening there, because the same thing is happening here. It's the same thing that's happening across the country. This was mentioned before, overcoming a language barrier, language in terms of your mother tongue, the language you spoke at from birth. That can be a challenge because some people's language abilities in English or French is not great. And when you're describing things that are very intimate to you and very, very personal and sometimes very technical, you can't do that well in English or French. You could do it better, perhaps, in your own language. So that's one, but also expressing your concerns in a way that you feel comfortable as a queer person talking to someone else. And that could be a queer practitioner, might not be. There are queer practitioners in the country. You may or may not find them and so on, but you want to do it in language that you feel comfortable using. And oftentimes it's difficult to get people over that hurdle. And as I mentioned, people who are speaking the language that you spoke when you were in the country of origin can sometimes be a really re-traumatizing, additionally traumatizing set of circumstances, because they carry the same biases. You expect that, because somebody is a doctor, that they are completely open. That's not really true. They might be, but you can't necessarily expect that. And of course, there's lots of baggage that people bring medically, mental health wise, and so on from their past. And mental health, as I say, I mean, pretty much I would imagine any refugee or asylum seeker that arrives in Canada probably has a significant amount of mental health issues that they've had to deal with. No exception for people who are LGBTQ, but the thing they do not have or did not have was the support, or necessarily the support of family and the support of community. So there is an isolation aspect to what they have come through that they are still challenged with. And even if you talk to people that are in our community or umbrella of communities, they are still not necessarily able to open up completely. I heard some comments about, people lying, people not wanting to share. We have that. And sometimes the people that we know have had, 2, 3, 4 years of us in communication with them, and they still are guarded. And in part, that's because, I think this was also mentioned, is it's like something gets back home. It threatens my family, it threatens my friends, and so on. So access to therapists is a real challenge, because therapy is a luxury. I mean, people, if you can find somebody to provide you therapy, it costs a lot of money. Most newcomers don't have that kind of money. We were fortunate enough to ourselves to find someone who is a practicing therapist in Ottawa who does remote sessions and will do it under IFHP. IFHP is another one of those dogs that you know is incredibly difficult to work with because they make it so challenging. It's managed by Medivie Blue Cross, and you have to get permission for a lot of what they do. That's for dental, mental health, for prescription drugs, and so on and so forth. And sometimes it takes months to get approvals from them to be able to get access to these things. So when you find somebody who is actually accepting IFHP, you kind of hang on to them. You hope that they're good, but you have to kind of work with who it is you can work with. Mental health conditions, stigmatized in general in lots of different communities and quarters around the world. And it's hard to get people over that hurdle. And there's another one where IFHP is only good for a year. Sometimes it takes more than a year for people to actually get beyond that problem of talking openly about their mental health challenges. But by the time the year is up, you've lost the coverage. And again, you come back to, I can't afford it. I mentioned the sensitive practitioners, community health centers, and this is something that's come out of the work in Ottawa as well, is you're more likely to get a broader range of services through CHCs than you are through individual practicing physicians and so on. Group practices make it better, but CHCs offer generally, you know, like nurse practitioner and nursing support, some social workers. Sometimes there are therapists that are involved, et cetera, et cetera. They are also overburdened. I think during the pandemic, I must have spoken to 20 or 30 different CHCs, and none of them, they had waiting lists for years in order to get access to them. This was also mentioned before, the Rainbow Wrap, good thing to keep aware of. There's also something called the Foundation of Hope that you can apply for funds. There are 2 links, or 3 links rather there. You can find out more about that. And I think this is where I will wrap up.